The remarkable acceleration of AI innovation and its convergence with poorly regulated digital communications challenges humanity to come together as never before to build a global governance system for AI that is effective, expert, timely, democratic, and federal. It is widely recognized that AI brings astounding opportunities to boost human well-being. Nevertheless, it also brings immense risks for human safety and for concentration of power and wealth. While the challenge of wise AI governance is inherently global in nature, international initiatives by superpowers and intergovernmental organizations appear to be progressing too slowly and lack sufficient scope, mandate, global representation, and democratic method. Without a change in approach, global citizenry risks standing completely powerless in the face of AI. What is needed is a better treaty-making process. What I've just read are words from an open call for the Harnessing AI Risk Initiative. My name is David Wood, and as chair of London Futurists, I was pleased to add my name to the signatories of that open call. As you can see, I am joined today by Rufo Guerreschi, the prime mover of the Harnessing AI Risk Initiative and its emerging coalition. Rufo and I will be discussing the next steps for this initiative and how other individuals, organizations, and states can help form a critical mass to jumpstart an open, participatory, timely, and expert treaty-making process for AI. Rufo, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, David. It's an honor and an opportunity to engage in this conversation with you today.
Before we talk more about the Harnessing AI Risk Initiative, could you, Rufo, please explain a bit about your background?
Okay, so I am primarily, as you said, I'm the executive director of the Trustless Computing Association. I'm, in a few words, I'm a political scientist, I am a technologist, and I am most of all a activist for global democracy. And that's the my main essence. Basically, my current work traces back at the year 2000, in which as a young graduate from my master's in political science, I became passionate about world democratization movements. I worked for a small association in New York called World Citizen Foundation. I participated in the World Social Forum movements. After the 2000, there was a lot of hope to create a more just world, and also use the internet to do that. So many organizations and many startups afterwards, in 2015, I established the Trustless Computing Association to promote the democratic principle at the global level within and through the use of digital technologies. And also, even back then, from the first events and research proposal that we promoted, we saw that the digital was going to end up in a AI age, that sooner or later it was all going to be folding into an AI age upcoming. So that's in a nutshell where I come from and how we got here.
Many thanks. Now let's get to some basics. Could you tell us what is wrong with the idea that technology companies might be trusted to individually govern their own processes to develop and deploy AI?
Well, private companies in a domain as impactful as AI, impactful from the economic point of view, shaping the form of life militarily, are subject to certain pressures which don't align to the interest of the general public. And those are, on one side, is the maximization of profit, especially US corporations. They are legally mandated, and their CEOs are legally mandated to further only revenue, profits, and valuation. And they can't do that. There's a reason to fire if they promote any other interest. They're also subject to pressures from their host countries, given the extreme strategic importance of these technologies. The pressures, geopolitical pressures they are under are humongous to further national security goals or economic hegemonic goals and so on and so forth. In addition to that, there's been some efforts by leading AI companies to create ethical governance structures for their companies. No, that traces back to a few years ago after the scandals of social media. They created some internal ethics boards which were created, and then after 1 year, 2 years, they were disbanded because they didn't align with some of the other interests and pressures over the company. More interestingly, over the last few years, some of the leading companies in AI, both OpenAI and Anthropic, adopted it's called spin-in model. It's not a widely known term, but is a structure whereby you have a non-profit that controls a for-profit organization. And so they have similar structure. It's not widely known that our Anthropic has a similar structure as OpenAI. And they created this with the stated purpose of making so that an independent board with ethical people would actually isolate the for-profit company from those pressures that we just mentioned. What happened is that it's not as easy as it sounds. And so even though Sam Altman stated repeatedly that we shouldn't trust OpenAI unless in a few years they would not expand, democratize to all of humanity the governance of their board. So he always saw the current board structure as a temporary means for then extending this control to all of humanity, to the extent that OpenAI actually hit the jackpot. So if OpenAI actually made a breakthrough on AI before others did, and so this never came to fore. And by the way, Sam Altman also declared, repeatedly this fact that we shouldn't trust it, and that the power of the non-profit board would be democratized to all of humanity. Even suggested 15 months ago that we should have a platonic ideal of the US Constitutional Convention as a way to build the governance of AI. So basically, he was looking at something like a global constituent convention in which, in a democratic way, the people and the nations of the world come together to decide how to manage this technology, its risks, its opportunity, and what it's going to be our future. And he made clear the fact that this global body should be highly federal and with subsidiary structure, whereby nations should be allowed to have all the possibility to have their own choices, to the extent that their choices did not impact negatively in a major way the globe. And the same way for citizens, right? Because he qualified this because in the general public imaginary, especially in the US and in the West, global governance automatically translates into a dictatorship or an autocracy. And this is really a cognitive disconnect, which is the product of nationalistic propaganda that we're immersed in. Because everyone will agree that the least worst, as Churchill used to say, means of governing a city is democracy. The least worst means of governing a nation is democracy. Then automatically, if you extend that to the global level, it's automatically an autocracy. So this is something that is really a disconnect. Of course, there are major risks in extending major powers globally, but the risks of extending powers over very impactful domains like AI to the global level are less than maintaining the current global anarchy, whereby those with the most guns and the most money rule. And so therefore there is this acknowledgement is actually already embedded in OpenAI, Anthropic, and even declarations of Google DeepMind, which declared and made several paper analyzing in depth the kind of organizations that we'll need. And even just recently, the CEO of Google DeepMind made a reference about the fact that UN eventually needs to step in and take control. even of what they are going to do and of AGI. Yeah, that's about the reasons why they probably can't do it by themselves.
So they're telling us they can't really do it by themselves. Politicians are picking up that theme. Politicians are saying, hey, we can't let big tech mark their own homework, referring to the idea that they should just run their own tests and tell the world whether or not they've passed for safety and lack of bias and so forth. So global politicians are now paying attention. They've commenced a series of global AI safety summits, with the first being held in UK, in Bletchley Park in November 2023. And there's recently been a second one in Seoul, South Korea in May 2024. Tell me, are you encouraged by these developments, or do you think something else is needed?
Well, as you very well said, these major companies, the leading AI companies in the US, they called very loudly before states ever did, and even before some of the top AI scientists, about these dangers, because they were closest than anybody else, possibly with the exception of security agencies, which can't really talk in public about these matters, about the risks. And they called very loudly about for global coordination, global. We're now like about what is it, 18 months, no, more than 18 months, about 20 months after ChatGPT was released, and there's been a continued acceleration. So the acceleration hasn't slowed at all. The investment has multiplied, and so it's further accelerated on all points. And you could argue that these companies are repeating less these calls because they are growing more skeptical about the fact that states will come together and actually intervene in the decisive way that they need to in order to have control on that. Because you either control this technology globally, do control it in the whereby every state and every citizen is virtually secure that nobody else is developing this in the hiding in a dangerous way, or it's better to just go as fast as possible to be the first to realize this technology, and possibly through these put your imprint and try to do the good of the world, because of course now they assume that they know better. And so there is this skepticism which is kind of palpable in the recent declarations. Going back to states, so states have slowly followed the declarations of AI labs, of AI scientists, top AI scientists, which very loudly have called for mitigating the risks of AI, similarly to the way we've done for nuclear and bioweapons, and even more. And so they slowly have started, sharing these calls, and there's been some initiative or intergovernmental organizations. The US and UK took a lead. We have to be very grateful for the lead that UK took last November, because it really put the safety risks up and center, with documents created by the JCHQ where these risks were very spelled out very clearly. There were two tracks, and one was misuse, and the other one was loss of control. Loss of control meaning actually that humanity or any human would lose control of this technology. So that was very praiseworthy. However, the way these events have been created, they have evidently tried to mix economic goals with safety goals and geopolitical strategic goals, which have possibly prevailed over a global responsibility. And in fact, during the event last November, both the US and UK presented a plan for their own AI safety institute, evidently without even coordinating each other. And there was no talk at all about a global AI safety institute. For the kind of risks that they put square and center, of course, this needs to be a global way. Of course, no, China will never just join the UK one. Why should they? And so basically, this was very disappointing to me and to so many in our community. And so there was hope that something better would come along. A month later, the JCHQ and the NSA came out with guidelines for secure AI development, which was at least you had adults in the room, right? So you had the NSA and JCHQ, which we have to admit, they are the ones that have protected all of humanity from the nuclear risk and bioweapons and even encryption since the Second World War. So there are talks about these intergovernmental organizations, but 90% of the work is being done by them, right? So by the loose coordination of these national security agencies, even in conflict, now so Russians and Chinese and so on. So therefore, they came out with an initial document, and which evidently came off of backroom discussions that happened in Bletchley, which brought together the mentioned security agencies and another 18 security agencies of allied nations. And so this, even though it's a it's a closed group, but it shows that at least you have the adults in the room that are working on this, taking it very seriously, and they're talking. And so we only see that document out there, but there's at least that kind of attention, which is comforting. Fast forward now, we have basically in these last few months, we've had the EU approved a new AI Act, which is extremely weak. Basically, and it's extremely weak, but it's really the best that they could ever do, because the EU has no competency or any mandate on security or public safety, no mandate on foreign policy, no mandate on intelligence, and so therefore they're not even demanded. They don't even have the qualifications to do that, and also they basically have an over reliance on unanimity or a very large supermajority on decision making. So it enables a few nations to be blackmailed or bought to not go forward with certain things. And so the AI Act was like that. The Council of Europe approved just 2 weeks ago a treaty among 57 nations, product of a lot of work, but this treaty excludes national security agencies, excludes completely, basically, private companies, except the nearly completely private companies, except the ability of these companies to opt in. They just choose when and if to oblige. So it's really not only it's an initiative which is only among liberal democracy states, but it's also extremely weak. You have in parallel, you have autonomous weapons negotiations for a treaty that happened in Vienna, which is it's a good development, but we believe that and all these separated attempts. Now you have attempts which are separated by civilian use, by military use, by national security, and so that separate approach is not possible with AI. So to basically come to synthesize the situation, we have a situation in which the treaty-making process that is being adopted nowadays, which kind of reflects the one that was applied for nuclear and climate change, is very inefficient, very lacks inclusivity, and undemocratic. It's mainly based on unstructured summits, unanimous declarations, and it's often subject to veto. So you have some strong incentives for veto, especially veto of a few large nations. So basically there is a very hard way to generate, even though there is a latent consensus in nearly every state in the world, nearly every nation in the world, possibly 191 or over 193, know that they stand completely powerless, in the face of AI, to protect against the safety risks and protect against the huge concentration of power and wealth. Nevertheless, basically, they have no way to translate this huge latent political will to in a treaty, because the treaty-making process, is not proper. Fortunately, basically, I think we'll maybe discuss it further. There are examples, in history that are better in this sense.
So you're pointing out challenges, inefficiencies, drawbacks of the current approaches. And some people will say, well, it's just going to take time, and in due course, people will muddle through and make things better. But the open call you have created envisions a better treaty-making process. So let's be clear, what do you have in mind, and how will it be better than the current ad hoc mechanisms?
Okay, so I really like your question, because the preface of your question is really important, because even if you have a better 3D making process and you can convince that it's better, well, maybe the current one can be improved. So you first want to try to fix what you have if it's possible. And well, we believe that that's not really possible, and because on the Council of Europe, for example, 3D, that's already something that it's not including security agencies, it's not including private. It's just so broken to start. It can never really become, what we need. And basically that's because it started in a certain way, and now the main focus of this treaty is being approved, adopted. It's all about just convincing more nations to adopt this. So there's no real track forward. Well, there could be if basically if the charter review provisions of the Council of Europe would actually enable and facilitate an expansion and improvement, of this treaty as we go forward. But that is not the case. And basically, the Council of Europe treaty on AI suffers similarly to the problems of the UN Charter. The UN was formed in 1945, and every change to the Charter requires all 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council to agree. So you can't change a word of that unless all 5 agree. And so this veto has made it impossible to have any significant improvement or adjournment of the UN Charter since then. And so this faults of these treaties and treaties processes are very, very make it very unlikely for anything to be improved. Another example is Europe. Europe is a confederation that believes itself to be a federation of states, because given the powers it has, is much more of a confederation than a federation. And in fact, when they tried in 2005 to create a constitution and move to a more federal structure, they were bound to have an almost unanimity in the approval. So the agreed constitution was then put for approval of 29 states. There were only 2 that failed to approve it by a not large margin, that the whole project failed, right? And so therefore, moving forward, another problem of moving forward the current initiatives is the following: is that the initiative by the US and UK through the AI summits, now with the summit also in Seoul, and through their initiative through their security agencies, is clearly heading towards having liberal democracies led by the US creating these rules and moving forward these institutions, so that they will shape them for the rest of the world. Because basically, as some German diplomat we have been discussing with recently said, because that's the only way to ensure that the regulation of AI will have our own values of human rights, and freedom, and without having Russia or China or Iran or some dictatorship put it on. So that is the rationale, and some leaders believe it. Some leaders, they use this as an instrumental, argument. But it is a convincing position, because you could say, well, what if we create a whole democratic way to create these rules? Well, first of all, you have 3 billion people which are either illiterate or unconnected. So how can they really be represented by their states, right? Even if they have election, and still today there are dozens of nations that don't have elections or don't have really functioning democracies. The other fact is that you have a number of states that don't vote, and you have this, to be realistic, a huge asymmetry of power and wealth between a few states and some of the poorer states that may be very populous. So therefore, these constraints make so that, for these reasons also, a few rich Western nations, they feel that a way to go about it is basically to go in this direction. One major, possibly the key reason that this also will not work, is that is the fact that the proliferation and accidents, no, very catastrophic proliferation and accidents with AI are expected to be even more difficult to prevent than nuclear and bioweapons. Actually, much more difficult. Maybe there's just a technical aspect to explain here, is that even though there's a need of huge infrastructure, which is very rarely hard to get to build these models, these technologies, once they're built, the LLM weights are a very small file that can fit in a computer. And so these, if hacked, if stolen, if leaked, they could be accessed to to enable the holder to use that for capabilities to develop bioweapons, to do cybersecurity attacks, to do other very dangerous facts, or even they can be further trained and adapted to do other capabilities. And so the more we go forward, the more this danger becomes a danger that is really pervasive around the globe. Actually, the danger of AI in one way reflects the dangers of encryption. It's strange to reflect encryption as a dangerous technology, but the NSA will definitely agree with that. So basically, back in the 90s, up until the 90s, the most powerful security agencies of the world, they were able to break all traffic in transit. So any communication that could be intercepted and decrypted in transit, except maybe a few major nations for some period of time, they couldn't intercept selected communications of each other. Back in the 90s, at some point, with the evolution of computers, and especially with the evolution of some encryption protocols and algorithms that became widely available on open source, Zimmerman comes to mind. Basically, you had a widely available, algorithmically unbreakable encryption. So almost from day to night, the most powerful security agencies of the world, they could not intercept communications. And so, even small groups or individuals could access communications systems that couldn't be decrypted. So what happened back then, and actually it's very interesting, the story that Biden was actually one of the first to put out laws that was calling to find a solution to this, and a solution that was then interpreted to create a backdoor system with Clipper chip and so on, which is a different story. But what happened afterwards, after the US government tried to pursue the creation of a mandatory, well, initially voluntary, but that would have become a mandatory, chip within computers that would basically enable lawful access, just like we had phone taps. So it wasn't like any authoritarian thing. They were just trying to translate the rules for phone on the computer. But then this wasn't done properly at all, and the whole idea was probably wrong technically and architecturally. And so this Clipper chip, this technical hardware backdoor was revealed to be compromised, and so nobody trusted, and the whole thing fell apart. From then on, what happened is that the security agencies of the world, from that point on, and especially since 9/11, they had the only solution to prevent this going dark, it's called the going dark problem, was to compromise all commercially available technology out there. So they needed to compromise all available technology at the application layer, at the operating system layer, at the chip layer, at the foundry layer. So it's all being compromised. And if everyone who spent time looking at the Snowden revelations knows by now. And by the way, the Snowden revelations of 2013 were referring to the capabilities of 2008, right? And so basically, that's what took for the security agencies of the world, in order to prevent terrorists or rogue states to abuse encryption, to possibly further nuclear capabilities and bioweapons. The only solution they had, it was to create this global surveillance apparatus, all over the world, possibly with little pockets of exceptions within the US, because US citizens have certain guarantees that, of course, nobody has in the world, even allies, have any privacy guarantees. But they had to do it, not because they were mean, it's because these are extremely dangerous technologies, enabling terrorists or wrong state to coordinate freely across the world. That creates a huge risk when you have hugely dangerous technologies available, like nuclear and bioweapons. And so, therefore, that's what they needed to do. And these, of course, have had huge repercussions on democracy, because privacy is basically largely gone since then. There are some checks and balances, but this is has had huge repercussion at the democratic level. So I'm paralleling the risk with AI with that, because basically many in the Future Life Institute and even from the Oxford Institute for Governance of AI, they've been talking openly about this need, or even Nick Bostrom, for example, about the fact that given the speed of development of AI, we may be getting really close to a scenario by which you would have to basically constrain every computer to be unable to utilize dangerous AI technology, right? And this is very, very similar to what was done basically for encryption. But the way it was done for encryption was not necessarily the way to go about it. There could have been different way to go about it, in which basically these constraints on the security of these machines could be done in a way which is much more democratic, controllable, and transparent. And the same way for the surveillance that has been happening. You didn't have to have it in the dark with nearly no accountability. This could be done on a global basis in a democratic way. So basically, by saying that the problem of AI may soon be quite similar to the problem of encryption, back in the 90s, it doesn't mean that this cannot be solved in a different way. It just means that we need to be prepared for the need for the possible need for a level of oversight and surveillance, but democratic surveillance, hopefully, that it's very extensive, because these technologies in general are getting more and more dangerous in the mix of them. So using AI with bioweapons, the whole of that. So science is becoming more and more dangerous. There is, in fact, a TV series called Silo. I don't know if you've seen that, David, which refers about, it's a science fiction series who looks at the future, humanity, they live in a silos under the ground. It's not clear what happened. Some kind of catastrophe happened outside in the world, and thousands of people live in these silos, and they manage their own community in some kind of democratic way. The only kind of one of the special things is that all their computers are stuck to 1980s level computers, and basically all the inhabitants are forbidden to do technical or scientific research beyond a certain degree. So in any case, that's I think an interesting scenario to look at, because of basically we are coming close to this fact. No, actually, it's not close. We've been there since 1940s. So since the 1940s, people cannot just freely research nuclear weapons. People can't freely research bioweapons. Before, people couldn't freely research encryption. And so all of this research has been regulated. It's been regulated bad, in a non-democratic way, in a non-multilateral way. And so therefore, we are coming to the fore, right? With these technologies becoming more and more dangerous, more and more a smaller group can create huge arms. And so we are coming close to the end of our, I think, podcast, because my answer has been so long. But basically, we're coming close to having to deal with this fact that scientific innovations is just so dangerous. Then you need some humanity to find some way to constrain it and retain. Of course, humanity has to do it in such a way that will preserve and enhance democracy and freedom. Because this is the last thing I would say, is that not only lots of people think that by creating a global democratic structure, democracy and freedom will be decreased, but it's very likely that they could actually be increased, because currently a huge pressure on democratic countries, so-called democratic countries, about the functioning of their democracy and civil rights is exercised by this global anarchy that we have. So having a global anarchy, every state has to, basically ally with other states. They have to have secrecy. They have to have secret service. They have to have nationalistic propaganda. So you have these economic pressures, and so therefore, by not having democratic and civil rights on a global basis, that creates a huge pressure on lowering the level of democracy and civil rights inside nation states. Yeah.
So,
So that's basically.
Rufo, you've offered many criticisms there. You've pointed out many things that are wrong, but I refer back to a quote you yourself mentioned by Churchill, where he said that democracy is the worst possible way to govern apart from all the others. In other words, despite the flaws of democracy, we should stick with it. Now, people may say the same about the United Nations. It's the worst possible way to ensure global cooperation apart from all the others. So you really need to point out what will be different with the proposal that you've got, which I understand the key words are open intergovernmental constituent assembly. So how will this differ from what people have tried previously?
Well, I think, yeah, surely, Churchill was right about democracy being the principle. I'm completely for democracy. I have a wider view of democracy. I don't think democracy is only the liberal democracy idea that is being pushed forward by the US, and many of his allies wouldn't agree also. And there's a lot of flaws, but even though, and there's different forms of democracy which are comparable, right? I'm not saying that illiberal is not superior, but are comparable, and they have a comparable number of weaknesses. And we saw in the U.S. incredible divisions and the quality of leadership and so many problems, disparity of wealth, and so you have huge problems. And so therefore, but I think democracy is the guiding principle for sure. And the UN, yes, we could. You're saying, why bring down the UN, which served us so well, and so on. So UN has served a fantastic role because it prevented a major world war since then, which is an incredible achievement. It has prevented nuclear catastrophe, which is an incredible achievement. So we have to be very, very thankful for them. And nevertheless, it has also caused the Cold War. It has enabled a large number of nations to compete and engage in a nuclear arms race. It has made so that the nuclear risk is higher today than it ever was. And the bioweapons risk is also higher today than it ever was. It has created huge disparity of wealth and power in the world, and constant tensions. And so therefore, even though it served a great purpose, now it's not serving much purpose at all. In fact, well, not at all, but it's suffering. And if you see, for example, the UN Security Council, really the United Nations is really, the essence of it is the UN Security Council, the essence of power, because any real powers reside in the UN Security Council. To any action to be imposed militarily, and any changes to the charter, even the accession of new states, whereas the UN General Assembly can only issue declarations, a majority, and whereby San Marino has the same vote of China, right? And so, but of course, now UN Assembly, the General Assembly has some is important dialogue and so on and so forth. So the UN has a good role, has a great role, and will have a role. And our initiative, in fact, wants to actually be within the UN and be a agency under the UN umbrella eventually. And because basically you can become part of the UN system, not necessarily by having all 5 permanent members approving. So you don't really have to go against the UN, right, to create some global organizations for AI and digital communications. And also the UN Security Council has basically its much less of a unfortunately important today than it ever was than it was a few decades ago, because it's been disattended so many times. So many times the regulation, so many times states have gone forward not respecting the prerogatives of the UN Security Council, and so it's a weaker means for ensuring world peace. And so even on technology. So in fact, if the UN Security Council was a functioning body, it would probably be on the forefront of trying to tackle the AI risk. The AI risk, both in the use within the military and in the use in the civilian, which can't really be separated. And in fact, instead on the autonomous weapons, there's different processes. There's treaties, of autonomous weapons, which are coming forward. And so that's as far as the UN is concerned. But let's come to our initiative. So basically, our initiative is, as we said, it's different from those because it doesn't rely on these inefficient methods of unstructured summits, of unanimous declarations and vetoes. And it's seeking to be more inclusive and democratic and effective, to try to really coalesce the political will, which is there, right? So it is there. There are surveys and declarations that state to that, and it's been growing really rapidly. We need a formula to bring this together, to crystallize this consensus. And that formula is, fortunately, doesn't have to be reinvented. The most successful and democratic treaty-making model of history has been the one that has led to the creation of the US Constitution in 1787. So the way it worked is that after, in 1786, there were two states, of the 13 that realized that the Confederacy that was created just a few years earlier, after the Declaration of Independence, was way too weak to safeguard their state's national security and economy. We were living in an empire world, right? So basically, colonies weren't really allowed to be independent for quite some time, right? Because you had a lot of pressures, a lot of huge armies out there, and the states were not powerful enough. And also for trade reasons, they couldn't really, pool their weight and have trade relations that would be advantageous. So they understood they needed to create a more strong federation. So what they did, they convinced three more to convene in a Annapolis Convention on 1786, and they generally agreed that they needed to have a federal government, a real federal structure, like we have in the U.S. today, like we have in Germany, we have in Switzerland, and so therefore they in Annapolis they decided to convene a U.S. Constitutional Convention that would be working by simple majority. So instead of having every nation having a veto, they would decide, after working on 2-3 months on this constitution, they would approve a text on simple majority. And this text approved in simple majority at the end of this Constituent Assembly, of this Constitutional Convention, are basically interchangeable terms. That would become valid for the signatories as long as 9 out of 13 states ratified it. So this made so that, number one, during the constituent process, you couldn't have anyone having a veto because you were designing to simple majority. Even then, after the approval, if 9 out of 13 approved it, you could actually move forward. So what we're advancing is a very similar formula, but applied only to AI digital communications, initially possibly, and on a global basis. And it's so similar. So let me translate that to our plan. So we are bringing together, an initial critical mass of globally diverse nations. It could be as small as 7. We chose a number because we just needed to make things more clear. 7 states, which could be small, micro, medium, and so these states can have the same role of the 2 states that we mentioned that convened the Annapolis Convention. And they can basically come together and start designing this constituent process and start working on the rules for election and a mandate for this intergovernmental Constituent Assembly for AI and digital communications. Once they have an initial agreement, and we hope to achieve that, possibly not this November summit, but in the summits that will hold in the first half of next year. Once they have this initial agreement, they will invite any other nations, and hopefully a few other dozens will join. And at some point in this process, and they will join and also be able to ask for changes. But at some point, without waiting forever, that big nations will actually agree. At some point, this Constituent Assembly is called upon. There's going to be 2 months of work. A text is going to be agreed with simple majority, and then there's going to be a similar rule whereby if 65% of the signers actually ratify, then it's binding for those. And the mandate for this organization would include not only a regulatory body, but actually building shared safe AI infrastructure. So these states, even though large states like the US and China are not joined initially, they will still gain enormously from the economic point of view to build shared infrastructure that they can't do currently, and also have leverage by being able to negotiate their interest in a more with better leverage than they do currently. And so therefore, by having this course can play out, eventually being joined by China and Russia and powerful states. And this can actually join even after the treaty has been created, because as we mentioned before, one of the problems of these treaties is that the clauses for changing the treaty are just too hard, right? Because of this is something that is also quite complicated from the international law point of view, but and also possibly something to be worked on, but is that basically the clauses for changing the treaty usually require every single signer of the treaty to reapprove every change, right? And so this makes those treaties extremely hard to improve in any significant way. Our initiative will make so that there's going to be periodic reviews of the treaty, treaty charter reviews, they're called, in a small amount of time. This will enable, number one, to enable basically these treaties to adapt to an incredibly fast evolving technology. And two, it will enable states that didn't participate in the beginning to participate on equal way, on the creation of the treaty. So therefore, I guess one other aspect I would throw in is that China has been talking about the global governance, which is inclusive and democratic, and so on. So the rhetoric of China is there, even though it has really done nothing to further this cause. In the US, there's a recent survey whereby 77% of citizens want a very strong treaty. These surveys were done very detailed with the interviews, which were quite long, with 2,600 US citizens. So it's really stunning. There's 77% of them that want this very strong international treaty. And also, I guess that by using a formula which has led to the creation of the US and the drafting of its own values, would actually put the US in a position to make it hard for it not to join something like this, because the principles are similar to the one that they applied back then. We shouldn't forget that back then many of the states had different religious minorities. At that time, there were people in Europe who were killing each other for decades based on different interpretations of Christian religion. And so there were very different worldviews and religious views among states. Nevertheless, they found a common ground, and they managed to live together. And the same can happen again. So between the US and China, and especially if such a Constituent Assembly not only involves states, but also involves lower layers of society, possibly even directly citizens. There are some, of course, aspects to it which get technical. I refer you to and our audience to some of the documents on our site that go in the fine detail of this.
Maybe we've got time for 2 more quick questions. Actually, they're both important questions. You've looked ahead to a summit that is scheduled provisionally for November and maybe other summits with working groups next year. But before all that, you've got an online event taking place on 12th of June, which is billed as a pre-summit with a number of distinguished speakers offering their thoughts on the initiative. Could you share what are your hopes and expectations for that pre-summit?
Yeah, so we are very excited to host a pre-summit of the Harnessing AI Risk Summit that is going to be held in November in Geneva. We hold this, along the G7 side event, which is a side event organized by NGOs along the G Summit of Italy. And so we are honored and proud to organize this event in these settings. And by the way, in these settings, also the Minister of AI, quote unquote, of Italy will be speaking early in the morning. And also we have very distinguished guests speaking and distinguished advisors. The main basic question of the event is going to be bringing together a number of advisors and experts, which are mostly members of our coalition, to discuss from a very high, conceptual and also academic point of view, this thesis that we're bringing forward, that the intergovernmental constituent assembly is a better treaty-making model for AI. And so we have really exceptional members participating, from diplomats, from professors of Yale, and some academic people that worked and bringing together coalitions for this for over a decade. And also we have diplomats from the UN and from the World Economic Forum, the former head of AI. So anyway, it's not used to make a big list, but so we're fortunate to have a really powerful lineup that can really make a case and also discuss how basically we can improve this initiative. Because even if we all agree in the concept to be worth exploring or the solution, there are lots of the devil is in the details, and so that's what we'll be focusing on mostly on the pre-summit. And so we will have also recording. We're looking into having a live streaming, so please check back on our website now if we'll have the live streaming, but surely we're going to be recording it on YouTube and for wide acceptance. And by the way, during the summit also, that is an opportunity to engage with multiple states that we've been engaging for some time. So we've been engaging with several ambassadors of large, especially African and South American nations in Geneva, where we're based, and also the mission of one of the largest regional intergovernmental organizations with over 30 state members. So we have quite some traction with states in Geneva and with their missions there. But now we're moving up to the ministries of foreign affairs and the office of the prime ministers, which are really the decision makers on matters of this sort. And in fact, we are looking to engage with some of them during the G7 summit. We're, for example, engaging with Italy, as we said, with Germany now a little bit, and also with the Vatican, which has been calling for a treaty through the Pope in December. And by the way, the G7 summit is going to be holding a special session on the AI governance, global governance, which has been called by Prime Minister Meloni, and which will involve not only the prime minister of the G7 states, but also the guest states, which are mostly African. There are 4 African states and the president of the African Union, because Italy now wants to, it's close to Africa, wants to do things with Africa, and it's a lot about creating joint vision for the future in an equal basis. And so this aligns very much with the kind of discussion we've been having. And so we are counting quite a bit to actually engage at a higher level, going up the ladder there. And so that's going to be a pretty impressive opportunity to move our initiative upper into the uptake of states, because ultimately, at the end of the day, our initiative will work to the extent that we'll convince at least 7 states which are globally diverse to bring it forward. Because at that stage, we're out of the picture because, well, we'll just be some kind of like giving suggestions on the side with some possible moral authority given the network of advisors we have, but we're not, we don't have the legitimacy to bring it forward. So we would have these 7 states which are globally diverse enough that would be in charge of the initiative and bring it forward. The only thing that they won't be able to do is close it. So our goal would be to make sure that this vehicle will be all in their control, except them trying to close it in some way, right? So it's very important that this incremental process remains open, in really equal basis, so that the states that come afterwards are not coming as losers or members with a lower rights. So that's a key aspect. So yeah, we're quite excited about the G7 the summit, and also quite excited being able to have made so many waves and progress, and having attracted so many NGOs and top experts, even with very small resources. So we are extremely proud of being able to have achieved all of this, only being 2 full-time volunteer person and 32 part-time advisors helping out. So we're quite proud of the progress we've been doing, and so we are quite we expect to do even more progress and actually drive a very substantial power charging of this initiative, which can set us to achieve these goals when we close a substantial fundraising that we are pursuing as we speak in this week.
Tell me more about that fundraising, because what you described is a major activity. It's very important, but people are going to wonder, how will this be funded, and what prospects are there for it to become going faster with more funds available?
Yeah, well, first of all, the funding is something very important in movements and NGOs trying to promote a better governance or better international relations and so on and so forth. We live in a world whereby a huge amount of the activity in this space of so-called civil society, non-governmental organization, is directly or indirectly funded by states, or directed by states, because it's activity which is intruding in very major interests of states, which are very powerful economically, politically, with their secret agencies and so on and so forth. And so therefore, funding is a very important matter, not only because it's needed to get stuff done, because people have to eat, people have families, and volunteer work can last just so long, but it's also important where it comes from. Well, so our approach to funding is that at this stage, given the fact that we have surrounded ourselves on the control of the organization, or extremely morally, unpurchasable people that have very distinctive morals. At this stage, we don't really have so many. Ideally, we would have a funding which comes from every different state of the world, and very neutral, and would come from all over the world. But that's simply impossible, at the early stage. The one way to protect your association from pressures of your donors is to make sure that you have enough funds and not too much ambition to cover your ground, to really bring your initiative to fruition. So we are raising about 1.5 million, which would be enough to decently bring forward our initiative with a few staff in Geneva, and do what we do and in a good way, while engage with others, because a lot of what we do then creates momentum and waves and is a multiplier. By having those funds for the completion of the project, because our project, as I said, at some point is completed and goes with nation states that will have legitimacy to do that. So by acquiring these funds, it doesn't really matter so much where these funds come from, because basically once we have them, we have independency to use them, because we're not going to ask for them every year. no, and basically by having your salary next year depending on those organizations, you are actually dependent on them, right? And so therefore, that said, we're going for towards now foundations in Geneva. There's Rotary clubs, networks. There are foundations in the US which have put a lot of money in this space. And so that's what we're pursuing mainly. But see, on the long term, however, well, actually, in the medium term, we're actually also many of the nations we're engaging with, we're asking them to become to contribute with a fee. And so, because this is an initiative that is in their benefit and eventually controlled by them, so it's proper that they actually contribute with a fee. But that's going to be something that is going to happen more down the line. And eventually, the whole initiative will be only supported by the fees, because so these states, at some point, the creation of this constituent assembly and all these mechanisms is going to cost a lot of money. So we have very preliminary studies there, but so the funding of this will come from the set of globally diverse states that participate here. Of course, the funding will be proportional to the GDP, to the population, and so this is the funding. By the way, one very interesting aspect of the funding of our initiative is that the Global AI Lab, which is basically we foresee that there is a need of at least 15 billion to create a global AI lab that can be globally competitive. And so enable the participant states to create and advance technology of AI, which are state-of-the-art to close to state-of-the-art, which is key to make this work. And an interesting fact is that by nature of the current generative AI technologies, and the fact that the algorithms are widely available. So if you get enough money to buy the computers, you will get very effective technology that is going to be very impactful and very producing economies, productivity. And so basically it's almost like an infrastructure or building a road, a bridge. And so therefore this project could actually be financed as a project finance, as we said, similar to a bridge or a dam, through using sovereign funds and using even a private international capital. And this would become an even bigger incentive for states to participate. Of course, the infrastructure will make so that some of the states that participate would have to commit to purchase their AI from this lab at least of 50% of their expenditure, so that this lab will have a pre-licensing agreements with the participant states, right? Because they're building this technology. So this formula creates even more advantages for early participating states. And by the way, early participating states will be, by the nature of joining early, a project that could now, of course, there's always less advantage. They would have a higher economic advantages on the economic benefits of the lab and so on and so forth. So those are some incentive structures that we have put within all our interlocutions to different members. For example, even the AI labs. So we are offering any AI lab, leading AI lab in the world, to participate, because it's going to be a public-private, a good democratically controlled public-private engagement. And so the first labs that participate will have economic incentives. So we have the structure of incentives to incentivize early joining members.
So as we wind up, let's point viewers at trustlesscomputing.org, where there is more explanations about the initiative, the opportunities and news, and the forthcoming pre-summit. If people are inspired to offer support, either as funders or as states or organizations who can take part, you will find contact details there. Rufo, any closing remarks before we switch off this recording?
Yes, I guess I should say that, yeah, as David says, we have space for everybody. So we have space for no matter how expert you are in AI or in global governance, basically there's space to help out in our coalition in all kinds of ways, starting from reading and signing our open call. And that makes momentum, sharing our social media. And I think this is really a call, a mission for everyone to stand up. And even if it looks really ambitious and more people think there's nothing can be done, it is challenging. It is may have small chances of success, but it's the stakes are so high that we have to try, and there's an incredible excitement and incredible prize that stands for us if we succeed. Because if we succeed to have human controllable AI and humanity control AI, well, the benefits are incredible, right? So I think that for the viewers, there, I encourage them, because we talked about risks and nuclear and all this bad stuff, but there is so much reasons to work on this to avoid some huge risks, but there are just as many to actually move towards an incredibly bright future that we could await us if we manage the risks. So we hope that you have time, energy, and resources to join us, and we all welcome you. And so thank you so much, David, for this fantastic interview. And
thank you, Rufo Guerreschi, the prime mover of this Trustless Computing Association and the initiative Harnessing AI Risk. Thank you.